we have the roll call taken care of. If you haven't signed the attendance sheet, please do so. First thing we'll take a look at are the 2002 sales tax unaudited financials for fiscal year ending June 30, 2018. Apologize for the hard copies. In the future, we'll have it up as we typically do at board meetings. Nonetheless, let's take a look at what our numbers came out to be with regards to 17-18. Revenues $25.7 million. That was about a $1.1 million increase over what we had budgeted. So encouraging. Basically, the end of last year, we were about 1% better than the year before. Although we haven't made it back to the fiscal year 2015-16 range before things started going down, we are seeing some improvement. So that's very encouraging. And the first 2 months of 19 have been encouraging as well. We're continuing to see slight increase over last year, and actually the percentages are inching up a little bit in terms of improvement. So we'll see if that's a trend or not. With regards to the expenditures, the areas that are allowed by the administrative plan, teacher raises, that includes about 14% portion of the pay steps, $17.5 million. Professional development, $510,000. Lowering class size, $2.7 million. Tutoring and instruction, $923,000. And then the distribution that was declared in the 16-17 year, that's actually made in 17-18. The cost of it was right at $4.6 million. The net results was a deficit of $537,638. And when you think about it, there should be a deficit from the standpoint that we have made an excess reserve distribution of the excess funds from the year before. So the only way to utilize fund balance is to have a deficit. So I normally look at it in two steps. First step is how did we fare prior to that distribution? Because that tells us how we actually did for fiscal year 17-18. You know, was it a surplus or a deficit? And then if it's a surplus, of course that's a good thing. And then the distribution is the second thing I look at, and did it bring us down to the point where we had anticipated. So the $537,678 is a deficit, but then again it should be, because we're looking to utilize the fund balance that's over and above the $12 million. $12 million is basically $6 million, the standard reserve that we try to keep in the event of an economic downturn, and it's $3 million reserves for two $1,000 increases that have been approved over the past couple of years, past few years, 5 years or so, maybe even more than that at this point. Beginning operational fund balance is $16.6 million. That leaves us with an ending operational fund balance, excuse me, of $16.1 million. So before we go on to the next agenda item, ask if there are any questions with regards to the numbers that have been presented. I don't know if any of you have heard or have seen reference to the launch of our OpenGov site. It's our financial portal. Basically gives you access to our financials, not only our budget to actual comparisons, but our general ledger detail. So if you want to keep track on a month-to-month basis of how this fund's doing, LafayetteCheckbook.com is the direct link URL, and we have probably 3 or 4 places on our website that directs you there as well. So that would be a good way to stay on top of how this fund is doing during the year. Let's take a look or move forward to the second agenda item, 2.2, recommendation for declaration of excess distributions. So what we're looking for the committee to recommend is, of course, whether or not there should be an excess distribution. And historically, the committee has historically recommended an excess distribution to the board. So I'd like to begin where we just left off. So if you go to about the middle of the schedule, the ending operational fund balance of 16.1 million. These numbers are the same as the financials we just reviewed as agenda item 2.1. We try to keep a standard reserve of 6 million. That was set by the Blue Ribbon Committee and approved by the board several years ago, as well as setting aside a reserve for 2 $1,000 increases that were included in the salary schedule, as recommended by Blue Ribbon Committee and as approved by the board. We always try to have 1 year ahead of us, so that in the event there's an economic downturn, we have at least 1 year to sort of deal with that economic downturn. So if we back these three reserves out, or these three amounts out, which total the 12 million, it shows that the residual or the excess available for declaration is $4.1 million. If we divide that by the eligible employee count of 2,226 and provide for benefits of 28.15%, which is basically retirement and Medicare, it equates to a distribution per employee amount of $1,437.70. So with that said, we would take a look at, if this is in fact a recommendation, it would be in a separate check, distributed along with the payroll check for the month of October, which is consistent with the way that we've done it in previous years. You can see the history that's been provided. These are the excess distribution amounts that have been made, I believe, since this tax, we began collecting this tax. And at this point, I'd like to open it up for any questions or discussion.
Last year, did this committee recommend excess distribution, or did it recommend increasing the salary schedule?
If I remember correctly, I think it was an increase to the salary schedule. It was split, maybe like 5 to 3 or something along those lines. And the board chose to go with a 14th check, full distribution. But if I remember correctly, it was incorporating it into the salary schedule.
Was that question about last year?
Right.
So last year's check is in the...
Last year, it was distributed. It was distributed and reflected in that 1,647.07 amount that's listed for 10/31/17.
Okay, but does that mean that that's permanently in the salary?
No, it was a 14th check, one time. Yes, ma'am.
The committee recommended the raise to the board, basically overlooked the committee's recommendation. The permanent parts are the two $1,000 parts that are in salary. So each teacher has received $3,400 from the tax, $2,000 of it in their salary amount, and proposed addition of $1,437.
You mean out of all these years, we've only gotten 2,000 permanent?
This will be much more than that. 2,000 every year plus all the distributions.
Yeah, okay, we're not saying the same thing. The 2,000 that was given to them at one point has stayed in their salary, is what you're saying? Yes, okay. But none of the others? Didn't we, a year or so ago?
That was in 15.
It was in 15.
2015, 2010.
I remember that.
It seems like last year, but
It was in
Been a few
15.
years
time
back.
flies by so quickly that it's actually 3 years
14,
ago.
Millie, I'm correct in
I remember
saying that the 12 million that we have in reserve, and as well as the incidentals, daily, weekly, whatever, when we get our interest check in May, that is based upon that 12 million.
Yeah, yes, the 12 million is generating interest income.
Plus anything that's in the fund.
Right, as was the incidental
It's
as
a
well.
separate check and account, so that amount is isolated.
But none of that, like that interest, I'm just trying to refresh my memory. That interest check is not permanent to the salary. So the next year, their salary is not gonna be based on,
No, it's just a small check, it's like
yeah,
a
I know,
check,
but
$20,
that's
$40
one of the
check.
things, doesn't matter, it's still not counted,
No,
what I'm saying, it's
no.
not counted in the,
It isn't, but it counts towards retirement base.
Right.
I'd like to, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Phil, just got maybe a question on your part, Billy, and obviously you're not a prognosticator, but in the time since we've been dealing with this particular tax, even in our leanest times, we've paid out from it with an excess, right? Even 08, 09, we're in the downturn of the oil field. So your best practice is a year out to basically handle it. Obviously we don't know what could happen in the future, but is a year the absolute minimum as far as your best practice? Could it be 6 months so that we could maybe make a motion that could be supported by the board where there is an excess distribution, but we also continue to work towards building the salaries like Melinda and Philip have talked about in the past?
So, I'm not sure I understand.
So I guess what I'm asking is-
Mid-year to see how things are going?
Right, so your general practice is to hold out a reserve, correct, to keep
Yeah.
us, to give us a year cushion
Yeah.
in the event that there's this financial fiscal emergency. But even in the worst case scenarios that we've seen the past decade or so, we've still had an overall healthy 2002 fund. So is a year the absolute, in terms of that, of keeping that, would it be possible to have a 6-month reserve instead of a year, with the idea that we've always paid out even in the worst financial situations that we've been in as a district?
I think what my recommendation would be, and it's gonna be conservative, I mean, we just because of the position and the chair that I sit in, but would be, okay, so we had 2 years of sales tax collections dropping. I mean, the first year was like $1 million a month.
Right.
That's, that's
substantial.
heart skips a beat when you see that sort of decrease. And then, okay, so we had 2 years of that. Second year wasn't as bad as the first. We started seeing a little bit of stabilization. 3 years, which was last year, we actually saw a 1% increase. So from my perspective, I'd like to see 2 years where we feel comfortable that, hey, it's stabilized, it's trending now, so we can make a decision based on it. If we don't wait that second year being 18, 19, then I would be more, from my perspective, I would be more inclined to say, well, instead of possibly 1,000 going into salary schedule, maybe we do 500 or 600, knowing that if things continue, that would still allow for a 14th check. If things were to start declining again, we should be able to maintain that $500 or $600 amount because we have that, that differential built into it. So at this point, I would say, something permanent. I would not recommend going with 1,000 because I think it's still a little early. But we could definitely do possibly, $500 and then 14th check the rest and then take a look at it again, next year. And that's just my one person's opinion.
I appreciate your candor. I think this is one of these divisive issues where there's people who
Yes.
want it in salaries and there's people who want it as that extra check. And we'll never be able to get 100% on either one. But is it possible, through your explanation here, and it seems to be something, I'll accept that we could work on having a disbursement, the check that happens in October, but also working to gradually continue to build into salary where it
Yes.
secures that
We-
moving forward.
It
To
could
me,
be-
that is a real issue, because when we did the 2002 tax, that was the issue, that we were trying to establish a way to keep teacher salary in Lafayette Parish within the top 6 in the state. What, we're 20-something now?
Right,
Eight?
right. It
So,
fluctuates in the mid-20s, thereabouts.
that's the error in the heart, and I understand your position, I understand what you're saying.
I think they're sort of looking at the future and what internet sales are going to do to us. Because right now, we're seeing fluctuations in the local economy, but the effect of closing of Sears, probably the closing of Macy's soon, you know, how far is JCPenney's behind that? You know, what
But
is
we're
that going
gonna
to
get
find?
9-something% on internet sales.
But that has not, the internet sales are just not at this point taxable, and that's been a resistance from a national
I thought we don't let it
standpoint, federal.
on. That's happened.
Well,
It's-
It's changing a little bit, but Amazon is doing it just on Amazon sales, not any of the secondary sales of Amazon, which is the majority of what Amazon
Right.
sells. So until they can figure that out, and I don't know, there's resistance, I think technology, to me, they can figure that out. If you can type your address into a website and I can go see your house as a picture, why can't I know what sales tax you should pay? That doesn't seem logical to me. It's complicated, but it could be done. Somebody's fighting it on the other side.
Get that.
You know, so, and that's other than the economics up and down, we have to look at the possibility of where that is heading, because more and more people are buying online and not paying the taxes. That's to me, a little bit more of a concern than the rocky economy, which ebbs and flows.
And I know that you all see it even more than I do, but we have a shortage of teachers to start off with. We're begging for teachers, and part of these young teachers, I had, last year at Cecilia, I had a young man I had a young lady across the hall from me, stayed 4 weeks, came seldom, disappeared, didn't show up. They got somebody that was working on his PhD at UL to come and teach, and I did a lot of trying to keep him in the classroom. And he knocked on my door one day and he said, Miss Mangum, he said, I think I've fallen in love and I want to get married, but and I'm giving him marriage advice here. And he said, but I can live on my salary, but what do I do if I have a wife? He said, I guess you're going to marry up. And that's the situation we have, is how do we get these bright
Yes, indeed.
young people to come into this profession? And I still have this thing about what we told the public we were going to do. And I understand what you're saying and what's there. But
And-
how do we explain to the public we were 20-something in the state and the push was to be at the top? And I think we have a great school district.
You know, one of the offsetting factors to this tax, and just in general, is good or bad. Form your own opinion, but the way the MFP formula works is it's meant to redistribute wealth, so that it gives those parishes that, from a wealth standpoint, not that we have rich parishes in the state of Louisiana, but comparatively, you have some parishes that just do not have the ability to generate local revenues, like Lafayette Parish or St. Tammany Parish or Calcasieu Parish. So the MFP is designed to redistribute some of that income. So when you take a look at it from a local wealth position, we fare quite well in terms of ranking. But once the state funding gets redistributed to equalize it, we drop to the bottom 10 percentile, in terms of what we're getting overall. And that makes it difficult for us to change significantly that ranking, because our state funding gets reduced, because our local, that 0.5% tax, in essence says that, well, they're generating some revenues locally, so we're going to reduce the amount they're getting on the state side. And we still have to operate, day to day, and those funds are dedicated. So it's almost like a double hit, to where we're making this locally, but we can only use it for certain things.
So then my question becomes, since the state is, they're probably, what is it we get with the MFP, 2.7? What is that? The thing
Oh, that
they haven't gone up.
Yeah,
But they're talking about doing that, and there will be a salary for teachers and for support staff. does that impact your thoughts anyway on,
Well, if they give us our 2.7% increase, or 2.75% increase, and they tell us that we have to spend it on salary increases, then
so then that
it's a
goes-
wonderful thing. The teachers deserve it, the sports staff deserves it, but we're right where we were before they gave us the increase in terms of having funds available to do anything beyond what we're currently doing.
And remember what the charter schools does with this tax.
I understand.
You understand
As far as the salaries.
We're on the same side of that, or
We're really on the same side of a number of them, you just don't know it.
I'd like to go ahead and make a motion that the committee recommends the distribution as listed of $1,437.70.
Is there
Say that
time for
again.
additional
Can you
discussion?
say it again?
I'm making a recommendation, a motion that the committee recommends the excess distribution of $1,437.70 as listed.
Second?
So I'm gonna oppose that recommendation. I agree with Mrs. Mangum, as usual, that I think it makes more sense to include as much as we can in the salary schedule because it would make the salaries more competitive for teacher recruitment and retention purposes. And I think that there are some challenges with getting to the top 6, I know that, but we do have the ability to close the gap to a certain extent utilizing these 2002 sales tax revenues. So if you would feel comfortable recommending at least 500 be baked into the salary schedule, I think at a minimum, that's what this committee should be recommending.
The problem we're gonna have is until we can lay the groundwork of going out and communicating with the teachers, they want the check in hand.
Yes.
They don't like having $50 a month.
Yeah.
They really do not like having $50 a month.
We
They'd
said
rather
that
have.
everybody last
They
fall.
don't,
Yes,
they
you
don't-
did.
We tried this last year
Yes.
and without really being able to do a substantial, like do a $1,000 salary increase and a $1,000 check, I don't think we stand a chance with the general population as teachers supporting that.
Yes, I'm in agreement, and that is so, we tried, and, no, this is, if they want check, they want that in hand, maybe something that we can
I'm one
come
of the
back
staunchest
to.
supporters of getting into the salary, but it's an uphill
Yes, me
battle.
too.
I don't think there's enough money in the budget right now for us to go down that pathway. Like I said,
So they would still get a $937 check with the 500 built into the salary schedule, is that correct?
It doesn't really work out that way, only because you have to look at, if everything stayed the same, then the answer would be yes. In other words, if this was the actual results for 18-19, then the answer would be yes. But if you look at the budget for 18-19, the year that we're currently in, that's not the case. What's happening is we had a couple of things that occurred during the budget process. There were some student-teacher ratios that were lowered for emerging schools, and the board approved the additional teaching slots that created, in essence, lowered class sizes. So that being charged against lowering class sizes against this tax. So you had that. They also approved, we had several, more so than ever before, retirements. Because when the tax started, a lot of the individuals whose salaries were being charged to lowering class size started at the same time. They were within a couple of 3 years together. So we ended up having, it was over 20 scheduled retirements in 18. And typically, when they retire, their replacements move to the general fund. Well, we've been absorbing 3 or 4 or 5 every year, but we couldn't absorb 20 plus positions. And so the board agreed to put the replacements, keep them in the 2002 tax for another year, and bring them in gradually. So that as well was a change from 18-19. So from 17-18. So if you look at the 18-19 budget, you would not have enough to fund if we spend the full amount budgeted, and we anticipate being close in most cases, of, not having some of the variances that we have in 17, 18. You would end up having about 2.5 million. You need about 2.9. Let's just round to 3 million to get to your $1,000 increase. So you don't even have enough for a $1,000 increase, much less that 14th check. Not that there's any numbers set in stone, but I think it would be pretty nice if we could do both. Where, hey, we feel comfortable with that $1,000, putting it in the salary schedule, and we feel like there might be a 14th check in the neighborhood of $400 and up. Something that they're going to see, be a benefit for the holiday season, whatever. But again, so at this point, looking at 18, 19, we'd probably be in the 500 or 600 range that we could give, that we could include comfortably in the salary schedule, with the 14th check of maybe say $400, something like that. Yeah. So the math doesn't quite work, only because 18, 19, the operations are slightly different. The expected results are slightly different than 17, 18.
I have a question. How many teacher salaries are we paying right now out of the 2,000?
Ms. Mouton, it's about 61, if I remember correctly, thereabout. 14.
I don't remember the exact number.
Not that far from where you stand.
I think it was like 40, might have been 47
plus
and 14,
14.
or thereabout. 47 in the lower class size, 14 in the tutoring. And I want to
So
say
we're paying the tutor stuff out of that?
it's
The
the
second
end of-
classification is called tutoring extra instruction, but it's actually classroom teachers created that section.
it's actually what?
Classroom teachers.
That's always been there.
So it's 61, which is still, that's about half of what it was when we started, years ago. It was over 120 when I got here.
I know.
Yeah, it was over 120.
When
So
we were
it,
frothing at the mouth.
that part, the board has held true. They've frozen it for this year, and there's nothing more. I'd love to get back to going back. If we can go back to what we were doing before, where as we replace them, then that means that things have gotten better in other areas to allow us to do that. But hopefully, Andre, that answers your question. To give you an idea, it'd be in the 500 or 600 range with the $300 to $400 14th check is what would. If we have to book based on 18, 19, that's
That's what I would be in favor of.
Yeah, so would we, but they're right, when you give the teacher the check and they divide that by, think of it, it's divided by 12, how much they're getting per month, so to speak.
Yeah.
They make a lot of plans around those checks.
It's Christmas and all of that, they really do.
And I don't think it's wise on their part, but try to explain
Yeah.
that to them. That's, they don't listen.
Try to teach that to them.
I was hoping some teachers
Teachers
would.
are not the best students.
Yeah, they do.
And look, it might be just something to consider. We revisit this in, say, January, after we get our December sales in, right? And then you have 6 months. And we see if those first 2 months that were much better than last year, did that continue? And if it did, then maybe that's at that point in time, we say, well, let's start, be it surveys or whatever, getting the word out of what we're considering doing at the end of the year. Survey, and however you want to approach it, call it marketing, call it educating, whatever you want to call
Part
it.
of it is the culture,
And-
that the culture has been that I get that big check. And so that's what everybody's used to. They're not thinking through that one day they're going to be like me and have taught 999 years and there's no money coming in,
And the perception's gonna be, my check was less than last year, who's taking the money?
Yeah.
You know, they're not
That's
gonna see.
exactly, so we're
that
not
raise
doing,
in there.
and we talked about this before, I don't think we do a very good job of educating our teacher corps of this issue. It's not nobody's fault, I mean, everybody of course wants that check, but we, from the get-go, that was not,
Maybe we can dedicate the in-service to that.
well, I don't think it's a bad idea. Because I think ultimately, the fact that they made more money every month would,
But I think it's good PR too, if you can go out and say, teachers have been given a $500 raise with existing revenue. We did not raise taxes, but we were still able to give
Fine.
teachers a $500 raise. I think that that is something teachers would feel good about, the public would feel good about. I understand that it's more satisfying to get the lump sum check all at once, but I think there are benefits too that could be communicated to baking it into the salary schedule, or as much as possible.
maybe if they get the check from the state next year, there'll be more. They'll get a little
Rolling in the
extra. It's rolling in the dough.
Yeah.
So we didn't get a second on the substitute. Is there someone who wants a second with regards to including an amount in the salary schedule at this point in time? I think we all agree that it would definitely be a discussion that could be taken further during the school year once we get a few more months under our belt. But
So if we're considering that later, then what you're saying we do is now in October, we give them a check. It won't be the 1,400. It'll be 500.
actually, what I'm saying is if we go with the excess distribution as being the full amount, the 1,437, and we take a look at 6 months from now, I say 6 months, 4 months from now, when we're midway into the year, see how things are going, and at that point, have some discussions about what it might look like when we get to this point next year.
Yeah, we're gonna see what's.
And so next year, we'd be having a discussion of, do we feel comfortable with 1,000 or what, 900, whatever that amount might be, trying to probably
Making
keep
it
it close.
permanent in salary.
And maybe leaving or still being able to provide them with a $400 to $500 14 check.
We
Something
plan
like
on
that.
having a meeting like in February after we get the December sales
Yeah.
tax numbers in.
Yeah. We could do that. So I'll make a note of that. February meeting. Okay, so we'll go ahead and vote on the original motion, which is to recommend the full excess distribution of the 1,437.70. All of those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? We just quickly report that. Okay, so the ayes have it, which would mean that on the October 3rd, at the October 3rd meeting, or on the October 3rd agenda, there will be an agenda item that indicates the Blue Ribbon Committee's recommendation for this excess distribution is the 1437.70, and the board will vote on it, and we will be ready to distribute that amount as a separate check based on eligible employees who are employed as of the 4th.
Actively employed.
Actively employed as of the 4th. And that's not a change.
For the what?
October. That's not a
Okay.
change either. That's what we've done in the past. You gotta draw that line somewhere.
Okay.
Somebody's gonna receive the benefit of that, and
And that
others.
poor person that retired in the summer.
Yes, ma'am.
Worked all the way.
Yep. Okay,
The check, the retirement system will come back on us with all kind of reports and stop the retirement, and it's gonna be more of, you know how they are.
thank you so much for your
Right to your
time,
check.
and October 3rd is the meeting, if y'all interested in coming over.
Always.
October 3rd.
Questions for you?
So, good evening.
That's the only question.
How's the
Why is it
Car
called
Center?
the 14th check, not the 13th?
The 13th check is